The stars were quiet in the Kepler sector, just as they had been for over 3,000 years. The Galactic Council had made sure of that. 7 different alien species worked together to keep peace across their part of the galaxy. They were proud of what they had built together. The Zephyrians lived in beautiful crystal cities that floated in the clouds of their home world. Their bodies were made of living crystal, and they spoke with voices that sounded like wind chimes. They were the builders and architects of the council. Their ships were works of art that could travel faster than light. The nautiloids came from ocean worlds where the water was always warm and calm. They looked like giant squids, but with gentle eyes and soft voices. They grew their ships from coral and sea plants. These bioships could heal themselves and lived for hundreds of years. The voidlings were the strangest of all. They existed partly in normal space and partly in a different dimension called subspace. They appeared as shimmering ghosts to the other species. They were the Council's explorers and scouts, able to travel through space in ways no one else could. Understand. The other 4 species each had their own gifts. The Luminals could control light and energy. The Terraformers could change dead planets into garden worlds. Peacemakers could feel the emotions of other beings and calm angry minds. The Builders created machines that could think and work. On their own, all of these species had one thing in common. They came from worlds that were safe and beautiful. Their planets had perfect weather, plenty of food, and no dangerous animals. They had evolved to be peaceful and smart, not to fight and kill. Admiral Kextara was the commander of the Zephyrian fleet. She had held this position for 200 years, but she had never fought in a real war. None of them had. The Council had not seen true war for 3,000 years. They settled their problems with words and trade, not weapons. That peaceful time ended on a Tuesday. The distress signal came from the hegemony. A smaller group of 4 alien species who lived near the Council's territory. The hegemony had always been tougher than the Council species. It came from worlds with harsh weather and dangerous animals. They had real armies and weapons of war. The message was short and terrifying. Unknown hostile force has overrun 12 systems. Conventional weapons ineffective. Require immediate military assistance. The signal was weak and full of static, as if it had traveled a very long way. Admiral Kextara read the message 3 times before she believed it. The hegemony had plasma cannons that could destroy entire moons. They had kinetic weapons that could throw asteroids at enemy ships. They had antimatter bombs that could crack planets in half. If their weapons were not working, what could possibly be attacking them? Get me the council leaders. Kextara ordered her aide, a young Zephyrian named Yolandra. Emergency meeting. Priority 1. The council met in the great crystal chamber that floated in space between their home systems. Representatives from all 7 species appeared as glowing holograms around the circular table. They spoke in their own languages, but translation machines let them all understand each other. Show them the message, Kextara said. They recorded. Distress call played for the entire council. When it finished, the chamber was silent. Finally, Elder Morchanoth of the Voidlings spoke. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. This is impossible, he said. The hegemony has the strongest military in this part of the galaxy. What could defeat them so completely? More importantly, added Supreme Builder Zax Hearn, what are these creatures that can learn from battle? The message said they adapt to. Every weapon used against them, before anyone could answer, another signal arrived. This one was even weaker than the first. It was from Admiral Threndek of the hegemony fleet. He was the most famous warrior in their territory, a leader who had never lost a battle. Council species, the message began. If you are receiving this, then we have failed. The enemy is not what we thought. They are not machines or energy beings. They are alive, but they are not like any life we know. They do not just destroy our worlds, they eat them. They take our metal, our energy, our very atoms, and make themselves stronger. The hologram of Admiral Threndek flickered as his message continued. We have thrown everything at them. Plasma that burns hotter than stars. Kinetic weapons moving at light speed. Antimatter bombs that can destroy space itself. Nothing works. They learn from every attack. They adapt. They become immune to our weapons after seeing them just once. The council members looked at each other with growing fear. If the hegemony could not stop these creatures, what hope did they have? Send. Whoever you can, Threndek's message continued. But know this. Normal warfare will not work. You need something different. Something they have never seen before. Something... The signal cut off with a burst of static. The council chamber was quiet for a long time. Each species was thinking. The same thing. What could be more powerful than antimatter weapons? What could be more deadly than starfire plasma? What weapon could they possibly have that the hegemony did not? Elder Morchuneth spoke first. We must send our fleets to help. Them with what? Asked Kexthera. Our ships are designed for exploration and trade. Our weapons are for asteroid mining and clearing space debris. We have not built true warships in thousands of years. Then we must learn, said the Peacemaker representative, her gentle voice full of determination. We cannot let these creatures destroy everything we have built. The vote was unanimous. All 7 species would send their best ships and their smartest people to help the hegemony. But as they made their plans, each council member knew they were probably sending their fleets to die. The preparations took 3 days. Council's finest ships were loaded with supplies and their most advanced weapons. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock to create new defenses. Everything they could think of was tried. Energy shields, cloaking devices, quantum disser, as the fleet prepared to leave. Kexthera made a decision that would change galactic history. She activated the Deep Space Beacon Array, a network of transmitters that could send messages to the farthest corners of the galaxy. The Council had never used it before because they had never needed help from anyone. This is Admiral Kexthera of the Galactic Council. She broadcast to the stars. We are facing an enemy that threatens all life in this galaxy. We call upon any species that can hear this message to come to our aid. We offer full membership in our council, access to all our technology, and eternal friendship to any who will help us in our darkest hour. The message went out in all directions, carried by quantum waves that traveled faster than light. It reached the civilized systems near the galactic core, where peaceful species lived in harmony. It reached the neutral zones where traders and explorers made their living. And it reached the forbidden outer spiral arms where the so-called Deathworlds were located. Most species that received the message ignored it. They had their own problems to worry about. Some were too far away to help. Others were too afraid to get involved. But in one small part of the galaxy, on a ship traveling through the cold darkness between stars, someone was listening. Someone who came from a world where everything was trying to kill everything else. Someone who had learned that survival meant being tougher and meaner than anything. That wanted to hurt you. The message was about to reach someone who would change everything. The Council fleet departed for the hegemony territory, carrying the hopes of 7 peaceful species. They flew toward battle with their beautiful ships and their advanced weapons, not knowing that they were about to meet an enemy that would laugh at their technology. Behind them, the beacon array continued to broadcast their plea for help into the endless night of space, waiting for an answer that might never come. Or so they thought. The human colony ship USS Defiance was 3 months out from New Terra when the strange message reached them. The ship was not very big compared to the massive vessels that other alien races used. It was only 800 feet long and carried a crew of 37 humans, but it was built tough, with thick armor plating and powerful engines that could push it through the most dangerous parts of space, Captain. Jake Morrison was in his quarters reviewing supply reports when the ship's communication system crackled. To life, he was a man of 45 years, with gray hair and scars on his hands from years of working with machinery. Like most humans of his generation, he had grown up hearing stories about Earth, the beautiful blue world that had been humanity's home until the sun started acting up and made it too dangerous to live there. Captain Morrison to the bridge. Came the voice of Communications Officer Lisa Barnes. There was excitement in her voice, something that made Morrison put down his reports and hurry to the command center. The bridge of the Defiance was cramped and functional. Everything was designed to work, not to look pretty. The walls were lined with screens showing star charts, engine readings, and weapon systems. The crew sat at their stations, ready to deal with whatever danger space might throw at them. Lisa. Barnes was 28 years old with short black hair and quick fingers that danced across her control panel. She had been working in communications for 6 years, and Morrison had never seen her this excited about a message before. "Captain, you need to hear this," she said, pointing to her screen. It's coming from the direction of the Galactic core. The signal is incredibly strong. Someone spent a lot of power to make sure this message reached everyone." Morrison sat down in his captain's chair, which was more like a chair you might find in a truck than the fancy seats that alien leaders used. "Let's hear it." The message began to play through the bridge speakers. The voice was strange, like the sound of wind chimes, but the ship's translation computer turned it into clear English. The crew listened in silence as the alien called Admiral Kexara explained their situation. When the message finished, the bridge was quiet, except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Morrison looked around at his crew. They were all thinking the same thing. This was the chance humanity had been waiting for. Chief Engineer Bobby Chen was the first to speak. He was a small man with oil-stained clothes and clever eyes. "Captain, those coordinates they gave us, I ran the numbers. We're only 6 days away if we push the engines hard." Morrison nodded slowly. He was thinking about what this message meant. For 50 years, humanity had been struggling to find a place in the galaxy. Their homeworld Earth was gone, destroyed by solar flares that had turned the beautiful blue planet into a burning wasteland. The survivors had built colony ships and scattered across the stars, looking for new worlds to call home, but everywhere they went, they found the galaxy was already full of other species. Most of them were peaceful, but they saw humans as violent and dangerous. They called humans Deathworlders because they came from a planet that was more hostile than anything the peaceful aliens could imagine. "What do we know about this Galactic Council?" Morrison asked. Dr. Amy Foster looked up from her science station. She was 32 years old, with blonde hair and the kind of mind that could solve complex problems while other people were still figuring out what the problems were. "Not much, Captain. But based on their message, they sound like they come from what we would call paradise worlds. Low gravity, stable weather, plenty of food and water. It's the kind of places where the biggest danger might be stepping on a flower. And now they're facing something that their advanced weapons can't handle," added Lieutenant Pete Sullivan from the tactical station. He was a former military man who had joined the colony mission because he was tired of fighting other humans. "Captain, if these council species can't stop this threat with antimatter weapons, what makes them think we can help?" Morrison smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that wolves might make when they see a rabbit. "'Cause Pete, we're not going to fight these creatures the way the council did. We're going to fight them the way humans fight." Crew understood what he meant. Humans had learned to fight on Earth where everything was trying to kill them. They had learned to be sneaky and vicious, and to never give up, even when the odds were against them. While other species had evolved to be peaceful and cooperative, humans had evolved to be survivors. "Lisa, send a message back to this Admiral Kexthara," Morrison ordered. "Tell her that the human vessel Defiance is responding to their distress call. Tell her we're coming to help." Lisa's fingers flew over her controls as she composed the message. "What should I say about our capabilities, Captain?" Morrison thought for a moment. "Tell her we have experience dealing with hostile forces. Tell her we're willing to fight." The message was sent, traveling through space at faster-than-light speeds, toward the Galactic Council's territory. It was a simple message, but it would become famous throughout the galaxy. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Defiance. We have received your distress call. We are en route to your position. Hold the line." As the Defiance changed course toward the Kepler sector, Morrison called a meeting of his senior staff. They gathered in the small conference room next to the bridge. The room had a table and chairs, nothing fancy, but it was where the humans made their most important decisions. "All right, people," Morrison began. "Let's talk about what we're getting into. Amy, what's your analysis of this enemy?" Dr. Foster pulled up her notes on her tablet. "Based on the Council's message, we're dealing with creatures that can adapt to any weapon used against them. They're biological, not mechanical, but they seem to incorporate technology into their bodies. They consume matter and energy to make themselves stronger. Sounds like they're learning machines, said Bobby Chen, but made of meat instead of metal. That's actually good news for us, Morrison said. Learning machines are designed to counter specific threats, but they can only learn from what they've seen before. If we show them something completely new, something they've never encountered, they won't know how to adapt. Pete Sullivan leaned forward. What are you thinking, Captain? Thinking that these creatures have been fighting advanced alien civilizations for who knows how long. Learn to counter energy weapons, kinetic weapons, antimatter bombs, all the high-tech stuff. But I bet they've never seen good old-fashioned human warfare. Morrison stood up and walked to the wall screen, which showed a tactical display of the Defiance's weapons. We've got railguns that fire solid metal slugs. We've got chemical explosives that work by burning and expanding. We've got kinetic missiles that don't rely on energy fields or exotic matter. Most importantly, we've got human tactics, Sir Lisa asked. Every species in the galaxy that we've met fights the same way, Morrison explained. They line up their ships in pretty formations and shoot at each other with their best weapons until one side wins. It's very civilized and predictable. Humans learn to fight dirty. We learn to use ambush tactics, psychological warfare, and whatever weapons we could find. Dr. Foster nodded slowly. You're right, Captain. These creatures have adapted to counter-civilized warfare, but they've probably never encountered an enemy that fights like a cornered animal. Exactly, Morrison said. And that's what we are. We're the descendants of survivors who lived on a world that was actively trying to kill them. We learned to fight not just to win, but to survive. The meeting continued for another hour, as the crew planned their strategy. They would not announce their presence when they arrived. They would observe the enemy first, learn their patterns, and then strike when the creatures least expected it. As the Defiance traveled through hyperspace toward the battle zone, Morrison found himself thinking about humanity's journey to this moment. They had been outcasts and wanderers for 50 years, rejected by the peaceful species of the galaxy. But now, for the first time, someone needed what humans were good at: war. The ship's engines hummed steadily as they carried the humans toward their destiny. Behind them, the stars of human space grew distant and dim. Ahead of them lay the unknown. A battle that would determine not just the fate of the Galactic Council, but the place of humanity in the galaxy. Morrison had no way of knowing that their simple message of response had already reached Admiral Kexthera, or that it had filled the crystal-bodied alien with hope for the first time in days. He did not know that the Council species were desperately trying to understand what humans were, or that their databases contained almost no information about the mysterious species from the outer spiral arms. All Morrison knew was that somewhere, ahead of them, an enemy was destroying civilizations, and 37 humans were flying toward it with nothing but their wits, their weapons, and their refusal to give up. It would have to be enough. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler sector, and what Captain Jake Morrison saw through the main view screen made him curse under his breath. The space around them looked like a giant graveyard of ships and stations. Pieces of metal and crystal floated everywhere, some still glowing with fires that burned without oxygen. Jesus Christ, whispered Lieutenant Pete Sullivan from his tactical station. How many ships were destroyed here? Communications Officer Lisa Barnes was scanning the debris field with her sensors. Captain, I'm reading the remains of at least 300 vessels. Some of them are huge, bigger than anything we've ever seen, and they're all torn apart. Morrison studied the destruction through his binoculars. The wreckage was not random. It looked like something had systematically taken apart each ship, piece by piece. Metal plates were missing from the hulls. Power cores had been removed. The smallest components seemed to have been carefully extracted. They're not just destroying the ships, Dr. Amy Foster said from her science station. They're harvesting them, taking everything useful and leaving the rest. In the distance, Morrison could see the surviving ships of the Galactic Council. There were maybe 20 vessels clustered around what looked like a space station. Ships were beautiful but strange, nothing like the functional design of human vessels. Some looked like they were made of living coral that grew in space. Others were built from crystal that caught and reflected starlight. A few seemed to be made of metal that shifted and flowed like liquid around the council fleet. Morrison could see the enemy. The creatures were massive, each one the size of a small building. They moved through space without any visible means of propulsion, but they were fast and coordinated. Their bodies seemed to be part flesh and part machine, with metal plates. Growing directly from organic tissue, are those things actually alive? Asked Bobby Chen from the engineering station. They're biological, Dr. Foster confirmed, studying her readings, but they've incorporated technology into their bodies. They're like living ships, but they're also individual creatures. And Captain, there are hundreds of them out there. Morrison watched as one of the creatures approached a council ship. The alien vessel fired what looked like a beam of pure energy, bright enough to hurt the eyes. The beam struck the creature directly, and for a moment Morrison thought it had been destroyed. But then the creature's body began to change. Its skin grew thicker and more reflective. When the council ship fired again, the energy beam bounced off harmlessly. They adapt that fast? Pete asked in amazement. Faster, Morrison said grimly. Lisa, open a channel to the council fleet. Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Morrison. Of the human vessel Defiance, we received your distress call. Please identify yourself. The response came immediately. The voice was like wind chimes, musical but somehow sad. Human vessel. This is Admiral Kexthara of the Galactic Council Emergency Fleet. We are grateful beyond words for your response, but I must warn you, these creatures have proven immune. To all our weapons, we've lost 90% of our forces in the past 4 days. Morrison could hear the despair in the alien's voice. Admiral, what's the longest any of your ships has survived in direct combat with these creatures? For minutes, 17 seconds, came the reply. The nautiloid cruiser Deep Current managed to evade them for that long before being overwhelmed. Captain Morrison, with respect, your ship appears to be much smaller than our vessels. I fear that if you engage these creatures, you will be destroyed in moments. Morrison smiled, but it was not a happy smile. Admiral, I appreciate the warning, but we didn't come all this way to run from a fight. All council vessels, fall back to a safe distance. We're going in. Captain Morrison, please reconsider. Admiral Kexthara's voice was full of alarm. These creatures learn from every attack, become immune to weapons after seeing them just once. What could you possibly have that we do not? Admiral, we're about to show you how humans fight. Stand by. Morrison closed the channel and looked around his bridge. His crew was ready, their faces calm but alert. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not survive it. But they also knew that if they succeeded, humanity would finally have a place in the galaxy. Bobby, I need everything you can give me from the engines, Morrison called to the engineering station. Lisa, open a channel on all frequencies. I want everyone to hear this, including those creatures. Amy, keep scanning them. I need to know everything about how they work. The Defiance began to accelerate toward the swarm of creatures. Morrison could see them turning to face the approaching human ship. They moved with frightening intelligence, coordinating their approach like a pack of wolves. Captain Dr. Foster said urgently, I'm getting some interesting readings. These creatures are incredible. They're not just adapting their defenses. They're sharing information with each other in real time. They're like a collective mind, which means they all learn from what happens to one of them, Morrison said. That's how they've been able to counter every weapon the Council used. But Captain, there's something else. Their adaptations are all based on energy weapons and kinetic impacts. They've learned to defend against plasma cannons, particle beams, antimatter explosives, and kinetic projectiles. But all of their defenses are designed around high-energy attacks. Morrison felt a grin spread across his face, which means they've never seen low-tech human weapons. Exactly, sir. They're adapted to counter the Council's advanced technology, but they might be completely vulnerable to primitive weapons. Then let's give them a history lesson, Morrison said. All hands, prepare for combat. Pete, load the torpedo tubes with Contactondal. High explosives. None of that fancy antimatter stuff. Just good old-fashioned TNT and metal shrapnel. Aye, Captain. Loading conventional warheads. Bobby charged the railguns with depleted uranium slugs. Solid metal, no energy. Fields, no exotic matter. Just chunks of heavy metal moving very fast. Railguns charging, Captain. Morrison watched as the first creature approached them. It was even more terrifying up close. Its body was a horrible mixture of flesh and metal with cables and pipes. Growing through organic tissue, weapons that looked like they had been torn from destroyed ships were mounted on its back and sides. "It's trying to communicate," Lisa reported. "Some kind of signal. Let's hear it." The sound that came through the speakers was like nothing Morrison had ever heard. It was part machine noise, part animal growl, and part electronic static. But somehow, the ship's translation computer made sense of it. "Surrender your technology," the voice said. "We will consume your vessel and add your knowledge to our own. Resistance is futile. We have learned to counter all weapons." Morrison picked up the ship's microphone. "This is Captain Morrison of the human vessel Defiance. We don't surrender. We don't run. And we're about to teach you something new." Creature's response was immediate. It fired some kind of energy weapon that looked like liquid lightning. Morrison had expected this, and he threw the ship into a sharp turn that would have crushed a normal human crew with acceleration forces. But the Defiance's crew was strapped in and ready. "Pete, fire Torpedo 1." The torpedo launched from the Defiance's tube with a simple chemical rocket engine. It was slow compared to the energy weapons the Council used, but it was also completely different from anything the creatures had seen before. The creature tried to adapt its defenses, but it was prepared for energy weapons, not a simple explosive. Device filled with metal fragments, the torpedo struck the creature's center mass and exploded. The blast was not particularly large, but it sent thousands of sharp metal pieces through the creature's body. The aliens screamed, a sound that came through space itself, and began to drift away from the battle. "Direct hit," Pete reported. "The creature is damaged but not destroyed." "That's fine," Morrison said. "We're not trying to kill them one at a time. We're trying to teach them fear." "Fire railgun. Target the next closest creature." The railgun fired with a sound like thunder. The depleted uranium slug accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and struck the second creature before it could react. The solid metal projectile punched through the creature's adaptive armor like it was made of paper. This creature also screamed and pulled back from the human ship. Morrison could see other creatures in the swarm beginning to move differently. They were no longer approaching with confidence. They were being cautious, trying to understand what had just happened. "Amy, what are you seeing?" Morrison asked. "They're confused, Captain. Collective intelligence is trying to process what just happened. They're adapted to defend against energy weapons, but they have no defense against simple kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. Let's keep teaching them," Morrison said. "All weapons, continuous fire. Show them what human warfare looks like." The Defiance dove into the swarm of creatures, its primitive weapons tearing through enemies that had easily defeated the Council's advanced technology. For the first time in days, Admiral Kexthera and her fleet saw the alien creatures retreating. "Impossible," the Admiral whispered, watching the battle unfold. "How are they doing this?" The battle that followed was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever seen. Captain Jake Morrison flew the USS Defiance through the swarm of creatures like a man possessed, using tactics that seemed insane to the watching alien fleet but made perfect sense to anyone who understood how humans thought. "Roll left, drop altitude, fire at the big one with the metal spines." Morrison shouted over the sound of alarms and weapon fire. The ship twisted through space in ways that would have made the Council pilots sick to their stomachs. Human ships were built to handle extreme forces because humans came from a world where extreme forces were normal. Lieutenant Pete Sullivan worked his weapons like a man playing a deadly piano. Railgun 1, targeting center mass. Railgun 2, aiming for what looks like a command structure. Torpedo tubes 3 and 4, loading cluster munitions. The creatures tried to adapt to the human weapons, but they could not understand what they were facing. They had learned to defend against energy beams by growing reflective skin. They had learned to stop kinetic weapons by developing flexible armor that absorbed impacts. But the human weapons were too simple and too varied for their adaptation systems to handle. They're trying to evolve defenses against solid projectiles, Dr. Amy Foster reported from her science station, but they can't figure out how to stop something that's just a chunk of metal moving very fast. Their biology is designed to counter complex weapons, not simple ones. Morrison grinned as he threw the ship into another impossible turn. That's the problem with being too smart, Amy. Sometimes the simplest solution is the one that works. USS Defiance fired a spread of torpedoes at a group of creatures that had clustered together. But these were not the antimatter warheads that the Council used. These were simple, chemical explosives filled with metal fragments. Same kind of weapons that humans had been using for hundreds of years. The explosions looked small compared to the energy weapons the Council had been using. But the effect was devastating. The creatures' adaptive armor could not protect them from thousands of sharp metal pieces moving in all directions. They screamed and scattered, their collective intelligence unable to process this primitive but effective attack. Admiral Kexthera, this is Captain Morrison. Morrison called over the communication system. We're transmitting targeting data to your fleet. These creatures have a weakness. What weakness? The Admiral's voice was filled with hope for the first time in days. They're a collective intelligence, Dr. Foster explained over the radio. They share information instantly, which makes them incredibly smart and adaptable. But that also means they have central coordination nodes. Take out the nodes, and the collective falls apart. We're sending you the locations of what we think are command creatures, Morrison added. Wet them with everything you have, but use kinetic weapons if you can. No energy beams. Admiral Kexthera's voice was confused. Captain Morrison, kinetic weapons are primitive technology. We stopped using them centuries ago because energy weapons are more efficient. Trust me, Admiral. Sometimes primitive is better. What happened next became legend among the Council species. The beautiful crystal ships of the Zephyrians began firing solid projectiles instead of their elegant energy beams. The bioships of the Nautiloids launched organic missiles that exploded with simple chemical reactions. Even the ghostly voidlings began using basic kinetic weapons instead of their exotic subspace disruptors. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable suddenly found themselves vulnerable. Their adaptive defenses had been designed to counter the advanced weapons of civilized species, not the crude but effective weapons that the humans were teaching the Council to use. Target the big one in the center, Morrison ordered, pointing at a creature that was larger than the others and seemed to be coordinating the swarm's movements. That's got to be a primary command node. Pete Sullivan locked his weapons onto the target. Firing all railguns, continuous burst. The depleted uranium slugs struck the command creature one after another, punching through its adaptive armor like it was made of thin plastic. The creature's scream could be heard through the vacuum of space itself, a sound that made every human on the bridge feel cold inside. But more importantly, the moment the command creature was destroyed, the behavior of the entire swarm changed. The coordinated attacks stopped. The creatures began flying in random directions, some even attacking each other. Without their collective intelligence, they were just individual predators with no plan and no coordination. It's working. Admiral Kexthera's voice was filled with amazement. Captain Morrison, your tactics are extraordinary. We're seeing results we never thought possible. Morrison watched as the Council fleet, now using human-style weapons and tactics, began to systematically destroy the confused and disorganized creatures. It was not elegant or beautiful like the Council's normal warfare, but it was effective. How many command nodes do you count? Morrison asked. I see at least 12 more, Captain. If we can take them all out, this entire swarm will collapse into chaos. Then let's finish this. All Council vessels, this is Morrison. We're transmitting locations for the remaining command nodes. Form up on us and follow our lead. We're going to end this right now. What followed was a systematic destruction of the creature swarm's command structure. The humans led the way, using their simple but deadly weapons to punch through adaptive defenses that had never encountered anything so primitive. The Council ships followed behind, learning human tactics and applying them with their own weapons. The creatures fought back desperately. But without their collective intelligence, they could not adapt fast enough to counter the new style of warfare. One by one, the command nodes were destroyed. One by one. Sections of the swarm fell into chaos and began attacking each other instead of the Council fleet. Chief Engineer Bobby Chen, watching the battle from his engineering station, summed up what was happening in simple terms. They're too smart for their own good? They built their entire defense system around countering advanced weapons, so they're helpless against basic ones. The final command node was a massive creature that had been hiding behind the others, protected by layers of smaller creatures that served as living shields. Morrison flew the Defiance straight at it, ignoring the enemy fire that hammered against his ship's armor. "Pete, load the biggest conventional warhead we have. I want enough explosive to crack a small moon. Loading bunker buster torpedo, Captain. This thing could level a city." "Perfect. Fire when ready." The torpedo launched with a simple chemical rocket, moving slowly compared to the exotic weapons the Council used, but carrying enough explosive power to destroy a mountain. The command creature tried to adapt its defenses, growing thicker armor and energy-absorbing skin, but it had no defense against a simple chemical explosion that released its energy through heat and pressure. The explosion lit up space, like a small star. When the light faded, the massive command creature was gone, and with it, the last coordination of the swarm. The remaining creatures scattered in all directions. It's no longer a threat to anyone. The space around the Council station was suddenly quiet. The only sounds were the soft humming of ship engines and the occasional piece of debris bouncing off a hull. The battle was over, and for the first time in days, the Council fleet was safe. "All ships, report status." Admiral Kekstara's voice came over the radio. "This is the Zephyrian cruiser Starlight. It's minimal damage. All crew safe." Nautiloid bioship Coral Garden reporting. "Hull breaches sealed. Ready for further orders." Voidling. Scout Whisper intact and operational. One by one, the surviving Council ships reported in. They had taken damage, but they were alive and their crews were safe. More importantly, they had learned something that would change the way they thought about warfare forever. Captain Morrison, Admiral Kekstara's voice, was filled with gratitude and amazement. "How did you know that primitive weapons would work when our advanced technology failed?" Morrison looked around his bridge at his human crew. They were tired and dirty, their uniforms stained with sweat and oil, but they were grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. "Admiral, where we come from, everything was trying to kill us long before we invented advanced weapons. We learned to fight with rocks and sticks and fire before we learned to fight with energy beams and antimatter. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, and she asked the question that would reshape the galaxy. "Captain Morrison, would you be willing to teach us these old ways?" 6 months after the battle in the Kepler sector, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of a ship that barely resembled the old USS Defiance. The Council had rebuilt his vessel using their advanced technology, but they had kept the human weapons and tactics that had won the war. The new ship was twice as large, with armor that could stop antimatter weapons and engines that could cross the galaxy in days instead of months. But the biggest change was not to the ship. It was to Morrison himself. He now wore the uniform of Grand Admiral of the Galactic Defense Force, a military organization that had not existed before humans arrived. The Council had learned that peace was only possible when you were strong enough to defend it. Admiral Morrison, to the bridge came the voice of his new communications officer, a young Zephyrian named Sylphana who had volunteered to learn human military tactics. Her crystal body sparkled as she spoke, but her voice carried the hard edge that all Council military personnel had developed since the war. Morrison walked to the bridge of his flagship, which the Council had named the Defiance in honor of the little human ship that had saved them all. The new bridge was larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever built, but it still felt like a human ship. The crew stations were built for efficiency, not beauty. Weapons were designed to kill, not to impress. The bridge crew was a mixture of humans and Council species. Dr. Amy Foster had been promoted to Director of Threat Assessment and sat at a science station that looked like something from a dream. Her equipment could analyze alien life forms from halfway across the galaxy. Next to her sat a nautiloid engineer whose biotechnology could heal ship damage in minutes. Lieutenant Pete Sullivan had his own ship now, the destroyer Retribution, but he was currently docked with the Defiance for a joint training exercise. His crew was teaching council officers how to fight like humans, while he learned to use alien technology that could bend the laws of physics. "What's the situation, Sultana?" Morrison asked as he settled into his command chair. "Admiral Weir. Receiving reports from the outer patrol fleets. Long-range sensors have detected movement in the Perseus arm. It looks like another invasion force, but this one is much larger than the creatures we've fought before." Morrison studied the tactical display that appeared in front of him. The new enemy fleet was enormous, stretching across several star systems. The ships were different from the creatures they had fought before, but they moved with the same purposeful intelligence. "How long until they reach council space?" Morrison asked. "At their current speed, approximately 18 months, reported Commander Veltheri, a voidling, who had learned to think like a human strategist. "But Admiral, preliminary scans suggest these are not the same species. They appear to be refugees from another galaxy." Morrison nodded grimly. This was what they had been preparing for. The creatures they had fought in the Kepler sector had been scouts, refugees from their own destroyed galaxy, who had been driven to desperate measures. But intelligence reports suggested that whatever had destroyed their galaxy was still out there, and it was coming this way. "Send a message to all fleet commanders," Morrison ordered. "Full mobilization. I want every ship we have ready for combat within 48 hours. And get me Admiral Kexthara. We need to discuss strategy." The past 6 months had transformed the Galactic Council from a peaceful alliance into a military powerhouse. Every council species had contributed their best technology and their brightest minds to the new defense force. The Zephyrians had built ships that were works of art and instruments of war. The nautiloids had grown bioships that could repair themselves and adapt to any environment. The voidlings had created stealth technology that could hide entire fleets. But the real change was in the way they thought about warfare, before humans arrived. The council had fought like gentlemen, lining up their ships and trading fire until one side retreated. Now they fought like humans, using ambush tactics, psychological warfare, and whatever weapons would get the job done. The integration had not been easy. Many council species had struggled to understand human concepts like acceptable losses and strategic retreat. They were used to avoiding casualties at all costs. While humans understood that sometimes you had to sacrifice a few to save many, but they had learned Dr. Foster established training centers on dozens of worlds, where council officers learned human military doctrine. The lessons were simple but effective. Fight to win, not to look good. Use whatever works, not whatever is most advanced. Never ever give up, no matter how bad things look. "Admiral Kexthara on the communication system," Sultana announced. A hologram of the Zephyrian admiral appeared on the bridge. She looked different now, harder and more focused than the gentle diplomat she had been before the war. Like all council leaders, she had learned that peace required strength. "Jake," she said, using his first name in the informal way that humans had taught the council species. "I've seen the sensor reports. This new threat is unlike anything we've faced before." "What are we looking at, Kex?" Morrison asked. "The size of moons, Jake. Weapons that can destroy entire star systems. And they're not adapting creatures like the last ones. These are builders, engineers. They're coming to claim our galaxy as their new home." Morrison studied the tactical data. The new enemy was indeed different, where the creatures had been biological. These ships were mechanical, where the creatures had been chaotic. These newcomers moved with perfect order. They were not raiders or refugees. They were conquerors. "How many ships do we have ready for combat?" Morrison asked. "The combined Council Defense Force has approximately 8,000 vessels," Kexthara replied, "not including the human colonial fleet and the new ships we've been building." Morrison smiled, but it was not a happy expression. "It's not enough." "Is it?" "No, Jake, it's not. Intelligence estimates suggest the enemy has at least 50,000 ships, possibly more, and their technology appears to be centuries ahead of ours. This was the moment Morrison had been preparing for. The Council had learned to fight like humans, but now they needed to think like humans. They needed to understand that sometimes the only way to win was to change the rules of the game entirely. Kex, remember what we taught you about human warfare? What do you do when the enemy is bigger and stronger than you are? Admiral Kexthara's crystal face seemed to glow as she understood what Morrison was suggesting. You don't fight them on their terms, you make them fight on yours. Exactly. Send orders to all fleet commanders. We're not going to meet this invasion head-on. We're going to show them what humans call guerrilla warfare. Over the next several weeks, the Galactic Defense Force implemented a strategy that would have seemed impossible to the old Council. Instead of building massive fleets to meet the enemy in open battle, they scattered their forces across hundreds of star systems. They set up hidden bases in asteroid fields and on dead planets. They prepared ambush points and supply caches. Most importantly, they prepared the civilian populations for a new kind of war. Every Council world became a fortress. Every citizen learned to fight, peaceful species that had never known violence, learned to be as ruthless as any human when defending their homes. When the invasion fleet finally arrived at the edge of Council space, they found something they had not expected. Instead of a grand fleet waiting to meet them in honorable battle, they found empty space and silent worlds. But as they moved deeper into Council territory, the attacks began. Small human ships appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished before the enemy could respond. Council vessels used hit-and-run tactics that the invaders could not counter. The beautiful crystal ships of the Zephyrions became invisible hunters. The bioships of the Nautiloids hid in the hulls of destroyed vessels and struck when the enemy came close. The war that followed lasted 3 years, but it was never in doubt. The invaders had come expecting to fight a civilized enemy that would meet them in open battle. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that had learned from the best survivors in the galaxy: humanity. The final battle took place in Earth's old solar system, the dead system that humanity had been forced to abandon. The invaders, battered and demoralized by years of guerrilla warfare, made their last stand around the ruins of humanity's first home. It was there that Grand Admiral Morrison, standing on the bridge of the Defiance, sent the message that would end the war. This is Admiral Morrison of the Galactic Defense Force. You came to our galaxy thinking you could take it by force. You were wrong. We are not the peaceful species you expected to find. We are Deathworlders. We are survivors. We never learned how to surrender. The enemy fleet retreated into the void between galaxies, carrying with them the knowledge that this part of the universe was defended by something they had never encountered before, an alliance of peaceful species taught to fight by the most dangerous species in the galaxy. As Morrison watched the last enemy ships disappear into hyperspace, he thought about how far humanity had come. They had started as outcasts and refugees. Now they were the guardians of galactic civilization. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but for the first time in human history, they were not alone in facing those dangers.